Okay, this is the grade 8 formative exam. The only two outcomes that aren't covered in this particular exam are the four outcomes that aren't covered, or four chapters. But the two that are missing from this, the two essential ones, are your fractions, decimals, and percents, and your probability. That will be done in a different video. But for the first one, we have a whole bunch of true and false. It says in the equation, -5 minus 2x equals 10. The value of x is -7.5, true or false. So in order for us to solve this, we can do one of two things. We can isolate the variable and see if it is -7.5, or we can substitute -7.5 into x and see if both sides are equal. So there's really two ways to do it. I'm going to isolate the variable by using opposite operation to see if I do get an answer of -7.5. And I do. So therefore the answer is true. So when I isolate the variable, I find that the answer is -7.5. But what I could have done instead of that, if I go back in time, right to here, I could take that and I could substitute, oops, there's my 2. I could substitute that in, and then I could simplify both sides. So -5, a -2 times a -7.5 is a +15. And the sum of those two is 10. And I would find that I have a 10 equals 10. So both ways you could solve it to find the answer is true. The second question, half of half is still half, and that is a false answer. So if I was to draw a picture, and I took half of this, that would be 50%. If I took half of that, that's not half anymore. That now is 25%. Okay, question number 3 says the line for the equation 2x minus 5 equals y. If you drew this equation, so I'm gonna actually make my hang on. So if I was to make an equation or a table of values first for 2x minus 5 equals y, I'm going to put x and y. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to substitute a 1, a 2, and a 3. Actually, I'm going to do a different numbers. Hang on. I'm going to do a 0, 1, 2, and 3 values for the x. And then I'm going to find out what the corresponding y value would be for each. So in the equation 2x minus 5 equals y, if I substitute 0 here, I will end up with -5 being my y value. The corresponding y value will be -5. If x is 1, then when I substitute that in here, I have 2 times 1 minus 5 will equal the corresponding y, or 2 minus 5 will equal y, or -3 will equal y. And when I do 2, I'll have this 2 times 2 minus 5 equals y, or 4 minus 5 equals y, or -1 equals y. And finally, when I do 3, 2 times 3 minus 5 is 6 minus 5, which means that y will be 1. So now, if I was to plot these coordinates, 0, -5. Oh, that's not -5, that's -4. 0, -5, 1, -3, 2, -1, and 3, 1, and connect those dots, I will find that this line crosses the y-axis at this point here, which is not 5, it's actually -5, which makes it false. And really what we've learned in grade 8 math is that the constant, whatever your constant is, in this case it's -5, that will always be what we call the y, the constant will always be the y-intercept, or where the line will cross the y-axis. Question 4 says the product of two negative integers will always be greater than the sum of two negative integers. So if I take any two negative integers, so I'm going to take -2 and -3. And I'm going to take those same two integers and I'm going to add them. So I'm going to multiply them on one side. And it says this will always be greater than the sum. So the rule for multiplying integers, when you have a negative times a negative, you will always have a positive value. And when you add two negative integers, in this case -2 and -5, it is impossible to add two negative integers and have anything positive. So you will always have a positive product when you multiply two negatives, and you will always have a negative sum when you add two negatives. So therefore, the product will always be greater than the sum. Question 5 says a small coffee costs $1.85. So what we want to do here is we want to calculate the unit rate for each. So I'm going to do small here. And it's $1.85 for 286 milliliters. And what we want to break that down into is a cost per 100 milliliters. So I'm going to do both of these different ways. I'm going to do a small one way, and I'm going to do the medium a different way. So I'm going to do it for 240 for 355 mils equals x over 100. So for the first one, I'm going to solve by division. I know that if I take 286 and divide it by 2.86, 286 divided by 286 will give me 100. So if I do the same thing to the $1.85, $1.85 divided by $2.86, the cost per 100 mils will be approximately 0.65 cents per 100 mils. It's 65 cents for 100 mils and $1.85 for 286 mils. Now the second way we could solve it, and the way I like better, is to use this algebraic method, and we can solve proportions using a cross multiplication method. So if I consider the unknown part, or the amount of money it is per 100 milliliters, as x, I can multiply this way, and 355 times x is 355x. When I multiply the other way, I get 240, because 100 times $2.40 is 240. To isolate the variable, I will divide both sides by 355. And when I do that, x will equal whatever 240 divided by 355 is, and that is 0.68 cents approximately, which means it's 68 cents per 100 milliliters. The small is 65 cents per 100 milliliters. So the small coffee is a better deal. It's roughly 3 cents per 100 milliliters cheaper. Okay, this one tended to give a lot of people some problems, but let's look at this first. So it says the coefficient in this expression is 0.2. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw it. And if I had x divided into 5 parts, it would be this. Now remember, a full x, that is x, and this number represents this one. So this is a fifth of x. That's how we would read it, a fifth of x, or x divided into 5 parts. So if I say a fifth of x, I can then think of it as being a fifth of x as well. So one way to think of it is x over 5, or a fifth of x, or a fifth of x. And if I think of a fifth as a decimal, a fifth is the same thing as 2/10, which is the same thing as 0.2, which means this, 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 and this all express the same amount. So yes, the answer is true. The coefficient is 0.2. And if I was to draw this picture here and say what's the coefficient, this would be a quarter of x, or a quarter of x, or a quarter of x, or finally a quarter of x. So therefore, the coefficient for this one would be 0.25. A cube with an edge length of 3 meters. So I'm going to draw a cube here. And a cube with an edge length of 3 meters means all of the sides of the cube are 3 meters. So this surface area of this cube is greater than a rectangular prism, which I'll do over here, which is 4 by 3 by 2 meters. So here we're going to use formulas. The surface area formula for a rectangular prism is the two faces that are rectangles that make up the front and the back, and the two rectangles that make up the left and the right, and the two rectangles that make up the top and the bottom. So the front rectangle is this one here, and it is a 4 by 2. So we have two of those that are 4 by 2s. And this left and right one, here's the left one here. We have two of those, and the left and right are both the same, and they are both 3 by 2. And finally, the top is 4 by 3, So we have two that are 4 by 3, which means we have two 8s, which is 16. We have two 6s, which is 12. And we have two 12s, which is 24. The total surface area of that rectangular prism would then be 52 meters squared in surface area. If I look at my cube, I have 6 faces, and each face is a square, which means it's 6 side squareds, or it's 6 faces that each have a 3 squared area, or 6 faces that have a 9 square meter face. This is 9 square meters, this is 9 square meters, this is 9 square meters. There are 6 of them that are 9 square meters, which means the total surface area of that cube is 54 meters squared, which means the cube does have a greater surface area, and therefore is true. The next question is simply a greater than or less than question using integer sense. Oh, that's not what I want to do. So if I take this here, and I simplify both sides, 10 take away negative 20 is really 30. And is 30 greater than the product of 10 and negative 20? That is negative 200. So the question is 30 greater than negative 200? Yes, it is. Significantly greater, because anything positive is greater than a negative value, no matter what size or magnitude the negative number is. And therefore, it's true. Question 9 is a good estimation for the length of the diagonal. I think I spelled that wrong, but I can never remember. For a square whose area is 64 meters squared is 11.3. So I'm going to first draw the square, and the area equals 11. No, I didn't say that. It's 64 meters squared. So if the area of a square is 64 meters squared, because it's a square, we know that the side lengths are all equal, and the side length has to be the square root of 64, or 8 meters, because 8 meters by 8 meters would give me the area 64. And if we have that, 8 meters here and 8 meters here, and if I was to erase all of the unnecessary or superfluous sides, I will now see that this diagonal is really the hypotenuse of a right triangle. So we know that Pythagoras said the a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And therefore 8 squared, which is 64, plus 8 squared, which is 64, will equal c squared. So 128 will equal c squared. So this is going to be an area of 128 meters squared, and this is going to be the square root of 128, or approximately, since 121 is 11, I can probably say 11.3-ish, which makes this a true statement. Question 10, if there are 5 planets, I will draw your 5 planets, and 20 stars. So if this is the picture, there are 5 planets and 20 stars, then the ratio of planets to stars is 5 to 20. Well, there's 5, yes, and there's 20, yep. 5 to 20 is correct, or we can write it 5 to 20, or we can write it 5 to 20. And in lowest terms, it would be 1 to 4. But here's where we made a mistake. It is not 25% planets. Even though this looks like 25%, it is what we call a part-to-part ratio. And you cannot create percentages from part-to-part ratios. You have to have part-to-whole. So in actual fact, this 5 planets must be to 25 total. So the 25%, it really is going to be 5 planets out of 25, which is 20 out of 100, which means that it's 20% planets, not 25%. Okay, question number 11 says, Bobby used the expression 2 3/5 divided by 4 to figure out how much $2.60 divided between 4 friends is. And he found that they get 13/20 of dollars. Is true or false? Well, let's check. So 2 3/5 is really 13/5. So if I change this mixed fraction to improper, I would get that. And divided by 4. If you want to get the correct answer to a division, one of the things we learned in grade 7 or grade 8 math is that you can multiply by the reciprocal. And since 4 is this, the reciprocal of 4 is the flip. So we can actually get the same answer by, instead of dividing by 4, finding a quarter of this number. A quarter of this number, that's what a dividing by 4 would be. So a quarter of the number would be this. And when we multiply that out, I get 13/20. So 13/20 of a dollar seems very reasonable. And let's check this out a different way. So if I was to say $2.60 divided by 4, I could have actually done it this way as well. If I divide it by 4, there's 0 there, and there would be 6 here, which is 24. 2 goes here, your 0 comes down, you get 65 cents. So if 13/20ths is the same thing as 65/100ths, then we know our answer is true. So let's just double check. Multiply this by 5 and multiply this by 5, and you get 65/100ths, which means it's true. We get 65 cents each. Or another fancier way of saying 65 cents is 13/20ths of a dollar. Question 12, in the sequence 10, 14, 18, 20, the 50th number will be 54. Well, this is a pattern recognition, and this has been going on since grade 7. So now that you're in grade 8, you probably still have these things going on. So you have x is going to actually be the n, which is the number in the sequence. And this is going to be v for the value of that number. So the first number in the sequence is 10, and the second number is 14, and the third number is 18, and the fourth number is 22. What would the 50th number be? So we're going to find the equation that shows the relationship between x and y. Here we have it going up by 4, and here we have it going up by 1. And the difference in x, or y, in this case the value, divided by the difference in the x, which is the n, will give us the coefficient. Once we have that, we can take any of the pairs and substitute them in. And if these two sides are equal, that means we don't require a constant. But since they aren't, we know that in order for those two sides to be equal, I need to add 6, which means that is my constant. And from what we learned from a previous question, it's also your y-intercept. So once we know the equation that matches all of these values, if I substitute 50 for the n, this should be n, and this should be v, then 50 times n is 200, plus 6 would make this 206. So the value of the 50th number in that pattern will be 206. Question 13 says a plus b equals c, and this is known as Pythagorean theorem. Now hopefully you all know that this is false. And what you should have to make it true is just a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So if you take a right triangle, the a and the b are these legs here, and the c is the hypotenuse. So in this right triangle, if this was 4 and this was 3, then this is not 7. It's not 4 plus 3 equals 7. It would be the squares attached to all of these, and I'll erase that 7. This area would be 16, or a squared would be 16. B squared would be 9, which means c squared's area would be 25. And therefore, the square root of that would mean that this side length, since this is a square here, the hypotenuse would have to be 5, not 7. So the answer is false. Question 14, a triangular prism has 5 faces. The easiest way for us to figure this out is to draw a net. You all remember drawing these nets of triangular prisms, and we have that. Triangular prism breaks down into this, which shows that there are indeed 5 faces. And finally, your match in this particular section. What I've done is I've just matched them all up. So if you want to press pause and just kind of match up your definitions. I know they're not perfect definitions. They're my kind of makeshift ramshackle definitions, but generally speaking, these are all ones that kind of work in those vocabulary. Question 15 is your table of values. Says what is the missing value? So again, we have a linear relation. So here your difference in your y column is 2 as you go down, and here the difference is 10. So 2 divided by 10 is 1/5, or 0.2, which means in the coefficient, you're really finding a fifth of x, or 0.2x. And that's the same as the one we did before in the true-false. Once I substitute my values in here, so if I take 10 and substitute it in for this x, I have 10 divided by 5. I substitute the 3 here. But 2 does not equal 3, so I have to add 1 to make my equation balanced. And now that I know that, if I substitute 840 into this equation, 840 divided by 5, I'll take my calculator, 840 divided by the 5 equals 168, plus the 1 more means the missing value right here is 169. Question 16, what is the surface area of this prism? Now for this one, it's a triangular prism, and the thing you probably should have noticed was that this is meters and this is centimeters. And before you start calculating surface area, you have to make a decision as to whether you're going to use meters as your unit or centimeters. Now most of you use centimeters, which was the wrong thing to use, and if you had read a little bit further, because this part in B asks for the cost in square meters, it is definitely better if you take all of it and change it to meters. So 80 centimeters is 0.8 meters, and 70 centimeters, the height of that face, is 0.7 meters, and those are the units we're going to use here. So I'm going to make my net of my triangular prism. I'm not going to use my formula, I'm going to use a net. And these little tick marks here mean that this is an equilateral triangle, which means all of the sides are equal, which means that all three of these rectangles are going to have the same area. They are going to all be 0.8 by 1.2, 0.8 by 1.2, and 0.8 by 1.2. And I would take my calculator and multiply that to find the area of each. 0.8 multiplied by 1.2 is 0.96. I'll use a black marker for that. So each one of these is 0.96 square meters. And the triangle face, the base of this is right here, which is 0.8. So base times height divided by 2 will be 0.8 times the height, which is 0.7, divided by 2. 0.8 times 0.7 is 0.56 divided by 2. Means that each of those faces is 0.28 square meters. So 0.28 and 0.28. Now to calculate the full surface area of that prism, if I take all of the sides, 0.96 times 3, plus 0.56, which is the two triangles added together, and press equals, the overall number of square meters of surface area is 3.44 square meters of surface on the entire prism. Now if it costs $4.50 per square meter to wrap it, I would then take my 3.44 square meter thing, multiply it by the $4.50 per square meter, and that would tell me it's going to cost me $15.48 to wrap up that box. What is the surface area of this cube? Well, if we think about a cube has 6 faces, and each face is identical. It's going to be a square face, because that's what cubes are. So if I think about this one face, it's going to be a 10 by 10 face. It's going to have 100 meters squared as its area. So the formula for surface area cube is taking the side squared and multiplying it by 6. We treat it like a coefficient. 6s squared, or 6 multiplied by 100, which is side squared, which means the total surface area of that cube is 600 square meters. Question 18 says the temperatures in Summerside from March 7th to 13th were -7 on Sunday, 3 on Monday, -5 on Tuesday, -5 on Wednesday, 6 degrees on Thursday, -1 on Friday, and finally 2 degrees on Saturday. So it says, what's the mean temperature, which means average? So if we add these all together, the way I'm going to do it, I'm going to add my negatives first. So -7, -17, -18 are all my negatives added together. My positives are 3, 9, 10, 11 positives. So the sum of these two, all the positives and negatives, mean the sum of all those temperatures is -7. And to find the mean, we have to divide by the number in the things. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days divided by 7. And I find the mean temperature for the week is -1 degrees Celsius. Question 19 is a bed mass question, and we have brackets here, these square brackets. And the reason why those are not round is because we had some brackets inside there. So inside those brackets, it means do this first, which means I'm going to follow order of operations even in there. So the product of 12 and -2 is -24. And 10, take away a -24. If you have $10 and your grandmother takes away $24 worth of debt, you're now worth a total of 34. Plus the quotient of this, which is -12.5. And when you add those two together, you get 21 0.5. A lot of people hated this one, but anyway, it's not that hard. My brothers Scott and Sean and I are cutting my parents' lawn. Scott cuts 2/5 of the lawn and Sean cuts 1/8. If I cut the rest, what fraction of the lawn do I cut? Well, really, it's not that hard. You just take what Scott cut and what Sean cut and figure out how much fraction-wise of the entire lawn they cut. So I'm going to add those two together. So 2/5 plus 1/8. When adding, you need a common denominator. This is going to be 16/40ths, and this is going to be 5/40ths. So my brothers mowed just a little bit more than half of the lawn. They mowed together 21/40ths of the lawn. Now, obviously, 100% of the lawn is going to be 40/40ths. So since I mowed the rest, I had to mow 19/40ths of the lawn, or just a little bit under a half of the lawn. So now we know what fraction of each person of the lawn they made. They mowed. So the first thing in B says, if it takes 2 hours and 40 minutes, how long will it each person to mow? So 2 hours and 40 minutes is really 160 minutes. Okay? So if I take 160 minutes, Scott's time was 2/5 of that 160 minutes. Treat it like a fraction. We would have 320 over 5, which is 64. So it is therefore 1 hour, 64 minutes is 1 hour, and 4 minutes is what Scott did. And I just used fraction sense to get that. Okay. For Sean took 1/8 of the 160 minutes, or the 2 hours and 40 minutes. So his was 160 over 8, which is 20, which means that Sean took 20 minutes to mow his part. And finally, my part, I had 19/40ths multiplied by the total of 160 minutes, or the 2 hours and 40 minutes. I'm going to cross reduce here because it's beautiful. And 19 times 40, well, 19 times 2 is 38. Times 2 again is 76. So 76 plus a 0 is that right? Did I do something wrong there? Hang on. Yes, I did, didn't I? It's supposed to be 4, not 40. So it's 38 and 72. That means I did 72 minutes, or approximately 1 hour and 12 minutes. That's how long it took me. Okay? Okay, question 21 is a simple Pythagorean theorem. So we can do it either with squares or the theorem itself. I'm going to write down the theorem. And remember, your legs are your two sides that make up the 90-degree angle. So I'm going to make this the x. I'm going to make this the 8. Doesn't matter which one you choose. But your hypotenuse is always the c. So when I simplify it, I get this. And when I isolate, I'm going to get rid of this 64. And I get x squared equals 80. Now, since I know that 9 squared is 81, then this must be just a little bit less than it. So if I square root both sides, square root of x squared is x, and the square root of 80 just a little bit less than 9. So 8.9 is a good approximation for the length of the missing leg. Question 22, or I guess it's not 22 on yours, it's 22 on mine, but the next question says, Jane can read 48, thank you, 14 pages in 8 minutes. So if I put a unit rate of 14 pages in 8 minutes, and then how many can she read in an hour, we can set it up like this. So notice how I didn't use 1 for the bottom of the second one. Since I used minutes for the units in the first rate, I had to make sure I used the same in the second. So it was just a quick conversion. And once you have that, you can figure out what you multiply 8 by to get 60, which is tough. Or alternatively, you can use that algebraic method that works all the time for solving missing values. So 60 times 10 is 600, plus 240 is 840. Divide both sides by 8, and x will equal 105. So therefore, she can read 105 pages in 60 minutes. Again, 23 is a rate question, so 50 meters in 8 seconds. So usually we have distance time, kilometers per hour, a rate of unit or a unit rate that we use quite a bit. So we always have time at the bottom. So we're going to put 50 meters at the top and 8.4 at the bottom. It doesn't matter if you did it the other way because you'll still be able to figure it out the other way as well. But what I want to figure out is how far they were able to travel in 1 second. So here I'm going to divide by 8.4, and here I'm going to divide by 8.4. And when I do that, take my calculator, 50 divided by 8.4 is 5.95. Let's take 2 decimal places here. So they're able to go 5.95 meters in 1 second. And if I do the same process for the other two people, and once I have all the unit rates done, I have to ask myself, okay, he was able to go almost 6 meters in a second. He went just a little bit more than 6 meters in a second, and he was able to travel 6.7 meters in 1 second, which means, Claire is the fastest of all the runners because she was able to cover the most distance in 1 second. The next question says, at the start of my trip, my gas tank was 3/4 full. I used 90% of the gas I had. So I used 90% of the 3/4 of a tank. So when I multiply this out, I get 27/40. I used 90%, so I used 27/40. If I think of it a different way, if I used 90%, I didn't use 10%, which means I would have 3/40 of a tank remaining in there. Now you might say, well, it doesn't look like it works out because 27/40 plus 3/40 is only 30/40. Well, that's right, because it was 3/4 full, which means there was a quarter gone, which means 3/40 of a tank remains. So this is a tough question. Most of you got it wrong. Most of you thought it was 13/40, but it's only 3/40. So 3/40 of a 50-liter tank. So when I multiply this out, I'm going to cross reduce. I get 15/4, which means that is 3.75 liters remain in the tank. Okay, so 3.75 liters remain in the tank. If gas costs $1.19.5 per liter, how much will it cost to fill the remainder of my tank? So if it's a 50-liter tank and there's 3.75 liters, that means that there's 46.25 liters left in the tank, or that needs to be filled, excuse me. So if I take that and multiply it by the cost of each liter, then I'll take my calculator. So I need to put in 46.25 liters of gas because there's only 3.75 liters in the 50-liter tank left. Multiply that by the cost of per liter, and I realize it's going to cost me $55.27 approximately to fill the remainder of my gas tank. Okay, the next question says draw this cylinder. So I'm going to draw this cylinder. There's a picture of the cylinder. The height is this distance right here, and the radius is this distance right here. Calculate the surface area. So our formula, since there's a circle on the top and a circle on the bottom, there's two circles that make up the area. And this distance here, which is the length of the rectangle, would be the exact same distance as the distance around the circle if I was to fold that circle back down, which means this length is really the circumference of a circle, and this part of the rectangle is really the height of the circle. So we could say circumference times height, or since circumference is pi times diameter, we're going to say that rectangle has a formula of pi dh, which means 2 times, we use 3, times the radius squared, plus 3 times the diameter, which would be 10, times the height, which is 5. This would be 2, 375, 150 when I work it out, plus 150 here. That means the surface area of the entire cylinder is 300 square meters. What is the perimeter of the square? Since its area, obviously meter squared means area, since its area is 36 and it's a square, that means that this must have been 6, 6, 6, and 6, which means the perimeter of the square would be 4 times 6, or the perimeter is 24 meters. Is 800 a perfect square? Well, using prime factorization, we can break down any number. And I'm going to use 8 times 100 just because I want to do something different. Neither one of these numbers is a prime number, so I can break this down into 2, which is prime, times 4, and then 2 times 2. So instead of saying 8 times 100, I could say 2 times 2 times 2 times 100, and that is also 800. This would be 10 and 10. Neither one are prime, but 2 and 5 is prime, and 2 and 5 are prime factors. So 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 5 times 2 times 5 is one way to get 800. But to prove whether or not 800 is a perfect square, we could say no, it's not. And the reason why is I should be able to take all of these prime factors and divide them equally into 2 groups. Since I have 5 2's, I could put 3 on one side and 2 on another, and one of those 5's here, and one of those 5's here. That's one way I can multiply prime factors to get 800, but I cannot put them into equal groups, which means that I cannot create one number multiplied by the same number to get 800, meaning it's not a perfect square. Question 28. It's just a simple algebra question. Get rid of your constant first by doing the opposite of whatever the constant is. So in this case, add 2. Don't forget your negative symbol stays there. Divide both sides by your coefficient, and you get x equals negative 2.4. 29 is your fraction question, so I'm going to change all of these real quick to mixed and improper. Keep my order of operations. I'm going to do my division first. Do my cross reduction. So I really have 7/6 plus 1/3, which is going to be 7/6 plus 2/6, which is going to be 9/6, which is going to be 1 3/6, which is 1.5, I think. I think that's right. Something like that. Your donuts here. So for this one, most of you probably did this. You say there's $4.40 for 5 donuts. You figured out how much it was for 1. And that would be 88 cents. Is that right? Is that 88 cents? 88 times 1. Yeah, that's right. 88 cents for 1 donut. And therefore, if you multiplied it by 6, you would find out that it's... Oh, I can't do that in my head. My brain's not working today. 88 cents times 6 would mean it's $5.28 for 6 donuts. The next one says, what is the equation that matches this graph? Well, the first thing you need to do is make a table of values. And I'm just going to choose any 3 points. I'm going to use this one, which is x is negative 2, y is 0. I'm going to use this one here. X is 0, y is 1. And this one here, x is 2, y is 2. So your difference here is, oh, Mr. Valet is excited. And this difference here is 2. So 1 divided by 2 is 0.5. So therefore, your 0.5 can be written like this, or since that's half of x, it can also be written like this. If you substitute your first pair, or substitute this one into here, 0 divided by 2 is 0. So in order to get to 1, I'd have to add 1, and therefore, this is your equation, or this. And your last question, what is the perimeter? This takes a little bit of thinking here. So if I wanted to figure out the perimeter of all three sides of this ABC triangle, I don't know this, which makes it a little bit tricky because in order to know how long AC is, it's a little bit longer than 8, but I'm not sure how much longer it is. So the first thing I'm going to do is think of this triangle right here. If I pull that out over here, sorry, let's not that one. No, this one here. If I pull that one out here, I know that this is 8 and this is 10, so I have a Pythagoras question. So if I work out all of the details, I'll find out that this leg here is 6 because this is 64 and this is 100. 64 plus 36 gives 100, so therefore the length of that would be 6 meters. And now that I have that, I can pull out another right triangle. This is x, this is 6, and this is 7.2. And when I use my Pythagorean theorem, x squared plus 36, which is 6 squared, equals 7.2 squared, which is, I should use the square button, 51.84. If I subtract that 36 from that, I get x squared equals 15.84. And therefore, the square root of that is roughly 3.97, or we'll make it roughly 4. You can make it whatever you want, really. And therefore, the perimeter of ABC would be 12, 22, 29.2 is your perimeter. So perimeter would be 29.2. Did I make a mistake there? I don't think I did I? No, I think it's all good. 6, 8, 10. Yep. Okay.